Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. My name's Rafael Salazar. I've been working nights at Miami International Airport for over a decade. Baggage operations mostly. Ramp work, ground guiding, moving luggage from belt to cart and cart to plane. Nothing glamorous. I wore a reflective vest, steel-toe boots, and a thick canvas belt radioed into gate control. Most nights blended together. The noise of turbines spinning down, the clank of container loaders, the screech of brakes on wet tarmac. But that Tuesday night in early October, that night had a different kind of weight to it, and I didn't know why until it was far too late. I clocked in just after 10. The airport was still awake. Red-eye flights to Houston, Bogota, Madrid, and the hallways were full of travelers with carry-ons and phone chargers tangled in their hands. The departure board glowed bright above Terminal D, and the overhead announcements cycled every few minutes with the usual warnings about unattended baggage and TSA procedures. Nothing seemed wrong. If anything, things were moving smoother than usual. Customs hadn't flagged any major delays. Weather radar showed only moderate cloud cover creeping over the Keys, and aircraft traffic inbound from the Atlantic was spaced out evenly. In other words, normal. The first hint that something was off didn't come from screams or crashes or some dramatic event. It came over the operations dispatch radio in a tone that wasn't urgent, just uncertain. Ramp Bravo, be advised. Tower requesting eyes on Flight 417 inbound from Madrid. Says ETA is accurate but transponder response is intermittent. A few seconds of silence followed, then another voice. Copy Tower. Jetway team standing by. Can we confirm airline code? Not showing on the gate roster. I didn't think much of it. Flight data glitches happen all the time, especially with transatlantic hops. Sometimes equipment resets mid-air, sometimes call signs get recycled, and sometimes a pilot just forgets to flip a switch at the right time. I was on rotation for carts at the time, waiting in a holding lane with a tug, sipping coffee from a thermos, and watching ground crews maneuver freight pallets onto a FedEx widebody at E16. My shift lead, Tony, walked past and waved toward me, then nodded toward the outer gates. Go give him a hand at E21, he said. That Madrid bird's coming in hot, no crew assigned yet. Just guide it in if they wave you down. It's probably some overflow slot. I finished my drink, tossed the cup in the bin, and steered the tug toward the perimeter gate. The rain started just as I passed the Jet A refueling depot. Light at first, then heavier, like a switch had been flipped. Typical South Florida storm. By the time I reached E21, I had to squint through the wipers just to catch the first glint of landing lights. Flight 417 was a full-size twin jet, looked like an Airbus A330 or something similar. No clear branding, no tail logo, just white with a thin red stripe along the fuselage. Odd, but not unheard of. Sometimes leased jets came through like that, especially if they were doing backup service for overbooked carriers. It slowed to taxi speed and began its approach toward the gate. I didn't notice anything wrong. Gear was down, engines idled cleanly, and the aircraft came to a controlled stop with nose wheel alignment dead on the mark. The cockpit windows were tinted as usual. No sign of distress. No smoke. Nothing broken. I signaled with my wand light. No response from the cockpit. Not even a blink from the landing lights. I repeated the signal. Still nothing. That struck me as odd. Normally you'd get a salute or at least some acknowledgement. Instead, the aircraft just sat there in the rain, engines still humming softly, windows dark. I approached slowly, glancing at the rear of the fuselage. No cargo doors opening, no ground crew in sight. That's when a white van rolled up from the far end of the access road. It had the DHS seal on the side and a flashing amber light on top. Two men got out. One in a windbreaker with an ID badge, the other in airport security gear. They didn't run, didn't shout. They just walked with urgency and entered the gate service door that led into the jet bridge. One of them keyed into the control box, and the bridge began to extend toward the aircraft's forward cabin door. That wasn't our standard crew. I keyed my radio and asked for confirmation, but no one answered. Maybe interference from the rain, I figured. Maybe the line was just tied up. Still, something didn't feel right. This wasn't how we processed international arrivals, even off-schedule ones. Passengers didn't start deplaning for several minutes. When they finally did, it was slow. 1 or 2 at a time, and only from the forward door. No luggage, no staff assistance. Just individuals stepping into the jet bridge with heads down, moving sluggishly, like they were dizzy or hadn't slept. I watched a woman in her 30s stumble sideways and catch herself on the rail. Her face was pale. The man behind her looked worse, sweating through his dress shirt, holding a cloth to his nose like he was trying to stop a bleed. None of them looked directly at us. They were escorted inside by DHS agents without any baggage claim instructions. No customs lane. Straight into a side corridor, out of public view. It struck me as more than just a precaution. It looked planned, like they knew what to expect. Inside the terminal, nothing had changed yet. Concourse E buzzed with the usual energy of late-night flights, announcements over the loudspeakers, families waiting at gates, pilots walking with duffel bags slung over their shoulders. The kiosks were still open. Security checkpoints operated like always. I checked in with Tony, who said nothing unusual had been relayed through ground control, except that E21 was under restricted access for health inspection reasons. Probably some flu or monkeypox thing, he said. The way they treat this stuff now, you cough once and they throw a quarantine net over the whole terminal. Just do your route run and stay out of E sector till they clear it. So I did. I made a cart run from C8 to D5, passed by a sleepy janitor mopping near the moving walkway, and helped a crewman unjam a luggage belt near the Delta counters. Everything looked fine on the surface, but little things started changing. Maintenance requests weren't getting answered. One of the cleaning staff mentioned that airport Wi-Fi had started cutting in and out. Then a fuel handler told me he'd seen someone collapse behind the international customs line and that medical hadn't responded yet. By midnight, I had seen 3 DHS vehicles outside the customs annex, all unmarked, no flashing lights, no sirens, just parked in formation with engine heat rising into the rain. Nobody came out. Nobody went in. Then we got word from control that all incoming international flights were being redirected to Orlando or Tampa due to system stress. Domestic flights still landed, still took off, but something was building behind closed doors. You could feel it in the way security started walking in pairs, in how the tower suddenly stopped giving updates, in how we weren't being told what to avoid, just told not to ask. It was around 12:40 a.m. when the power hiccuped, not a full outage, just a flicker, like a pulse traveling through the entire concourse. Screens froze, the air conditioning cut for 2 seconds. Then everything came back, but not quite right. Lights flickered overhead. The digital arrivals board reset to a maintenance screen in Spanish, and that was when the first scream echoed across Terminal E. It didn't come from inside the terminal. It came from the service hallway behind gate E20, the one we use for secure baggage transfers. I was in the break room off D concourse, refilling my thermos, when I heard it. Muffled, high-pitched, and then abruptly cut off. I walked to the glass door and looked down the corridor. Everything seemed still at first. Then I saw something move near the edge of the window's range. Someone stumbled across the floor, dragging a foot. They fell against a support pillar and vanished from view. I radioed in the incident, but still got static. I tried calling Tony. No answer. I decided to check it myself, grabbing a flashlight from the supply cabinet and walking carefully toward the hallway. My boots echoed against the tile. The hallway smelled like old coffee and wet concrete. As I turned the corner, I found the source of the movement. A ramp crew member lying on his side, face down. His vest was soaked in something dark. I crouched to check if he was breathing, but his head jerked violently, and I jumped back. He rolled onto his back slowly, eyes unfocused, mouth slightly open. His neck was covered in torn skin, like he'd been mauled. He reached toward me with stiff arms, not begging for help, but grabbing, like an instinct. I backed up quickly and stumbled over a trash bin. His fingers grazed my boot as I kicked away. Something about his movements wasn't right. There was no urgency in them, no confusion, just blind forward drive. I didn't stop to think. I turned and sprinted back down the hallway, my boots hammering against the floor, every light above me humming with that sickly flicker as the terminal systems glitched on and off. Behind me, I heard something dragging, like limbs on tile. The second figure, the one with the torn cheek, had already stepped over the first and was moving with the same strange determination. Not running, not lunging, just steady, single-minded pursuit, like nothing in its body had any fear or hesitation left. I cut left and ducked through a supply alcove, slamming the maintenance door behind me and flipping the bolt. The walls vibrated faintly with the impact as something heavy struck the other side a moment later. 1, 2, then silence. I braced against the door and listened for breathing. Nothing. No footsteps. No sounds of retreat either. Just the kind of silence that wraps around your ribs and makes you afraid to move. That wasn't someone in shock. That wasn't someone looking for help. And the second man, if he was still a man at all, hadn't even blinked when I'd shouted at him. I stayed there a few seconds longer, trying to decide if this was something I should call in again, but my radio was still dead. No tone, no channel lights, just quiet static. I pulled out my phone and checked the screen. 1 bar, flickering between LTE and nothing. The clock showed 1:03 a.m. and notifications were frozen. No missed calls, no texts, no weather update. My signal had dropped sometime during the run. The last alert was from the airport app confirming that Flight 417 had landed successfully. After that, nothing. I climbed through the storage room, past boxes of bottled water and backup flashlights. I knew this area well. There was a stairwell behind the utility wall that led down into the older part of the terminal. Low-ceiling corridors, originally built for staff movement in the 80s, long since retrofitted and mostly forgotten except by janitors and baggage crews. From there, I could loop around toward the tram tunnel or even cut across into Terminal C. It wouldn't be faster, but it would be less exposed. The stairwell lights were dim and buzzed faintly, but they worked. I moved quickly, gripping the rail as I descended. There were no cameras down here, no checkpoints, just plain concrete, rusted steel rails, and an odd smell that reminded me of a flooded basement after a storm. I passed a storage cart and a mop bucket tipped on its side, water still pooling. There were no bodies down here, no infected, but I didn't feel alone. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway opened into a narrow corridor lined with conduit piping. This place hadn't seen upgrades in years. Dust and old floor polish coated the corners, and a few overhead bulbs had long since burned out. As I walked, I heard a rhythmic creaking echoing down the hall. I froze for a moment, then realized it was probably the tram system overhead. The automated train still ran at night on a reduced schedule, carrying staff between terminals. That meant power was still active, at least in sections. I stopped near a vent shaft and tried the emergency intercom panel mounted on the wall. The button clicked but gave no tone. Useless. I pushed on. My goal was the corridor junction under D17. There was a ladder that led up to a floor grate just behind one of the snack kiosks. I figured if I could reach the crowd again, if people were still up there and things hadn't fully gone to hell, I could get to a security checkpoint, maybe even grab a company radio. But when I emerged at the junction, I saw the first sign that whatever was happening was much bigger than I had feared. The grate above had already been popped loose from underneath. Someone else had come down, or tried to. A flashlight lay flickering in the corner, its battery dying. The floor was streaked with long black smears, footprints at first, then handprints. I followed the direction of the stains and saw a security guard's hat crushed against the base of a stair platform. No body, no gear, just the hat and a badge bent nearly in half, like it had been stomped or crushed. I climbed the ladder and pushed through the grate, lifting it just enough to peek. What I saw on the other side froze me in place. The terminal above was in chaos. Not total collapse, but on the edge of it. People were running in opposite directions. A man in a pilot's uniform was dragging someone behind a kiosk, shouting into a radio. I could hear raised voices, crying, some distant shouting in Spanish. A woman screamed, but not the sharp kind of scream. More like she was howling without stopping, like something had snapped in her mind. TSA agents were trying to get people to move, to organize, but the crowd had no trust left. Passengers were grabbing their own bags, ducking past barriers, and pouring into concourses that hadn't been cleared, An alarm was blaring near gate E14. Someone had smashed through a fire exit. No one was stopping them. I lowered the grate and dropped back into the tunnel. I needed a weapon. I had nothing but a flashlight and my radio, and both were nearly useless now. I remembered there was a secured custodial locker down near the south baggage transfer lift, where the facility kept heavier tools, crowbars, bolt cutters, things normally used for equipment jams. I headed that way, keeping close to the wall, listening for any sound that didn't belong. When I reached the locker, it was already open. The lock had been snapped. Inside, a tool bag lay half emptied, and a roll of heavy cable had been dragged partway out and abandoned. I grabbed a crowbar and checked the weight. Good balance, solid grip. I wasn't planning to fight anyone, but if those things in the hallway, whatever they were, came back, I needed something more than just my fists. I made my way back through the corridor, past the twisted security badge and flickering light. I climbed again, but this time I emerged behind a gate partition near the hallway leading to the staff lounge. It was quieter here, but not empty. A pair of cleaning staff crouched by a vending machine, whispering frantically. One of them saw me and waved me over. His name tag read Jorge, and I recognized him from shift overlaps. His voice was strained, almost hoarse. "You see them?" he asked. "The people with the eyes?" I nodded slowly. "What's going on?" He shook his head. "I don't know. They don't bleed like us. They don't scream when you hit them." One grabbed Nancy by the collar and just bit into her neck like it was a sandwich. She didn't even get to scream. I ran. I didn't even try to help. I didn't blame him. I wouldn't have either. We stuck together after that, creeping through the terminal side halls. I didn't tell him I'd seen DHS vehicles earlier, or that the plane from Madrid had come in dark. There wasn't any point. What mattered now was finding a way out. The south terminal was the best shot, quieter, fewer international arrivals, and a direct link to the car rental garage. If we could get outside, maybe we could radio someone. Police. Rescue. Anyone. But as we passed gate D20, I saw something that stopped me cold. The emergency shutters had dropped. Thick steel security grills were down over the exit paths. The powered doors were locked. Red lights glowed above them, signaling system override. We were sealed in. Someone, or something, had locked down the terminal. That's when I heard the tram arrive. The plane train, still running on its automated loop, hissed to a stop at the CD connector. Normally it was silent at night, gliding in without fanfare. But tonight it screeched, and the lights inside flickered like a bad horror movie. The doors opened, and something spilled out. Not one person, not two. A group, maybe 6 or 7 figures stumbling forward in jerky motion. Torn clothes, blood smeared across forearms and shirts. One of them wore a security badge. Another was barefoot, with what looked like half his scalp hanging off in threads. They walked silently, slowly, spreading across the hallway. There was no noise from them, no screaming or growling like you'd expect from a human in pain or panic. Just the sound of their dragging steps, the shuffle of shoes half on, the wet slap of bare feet against linoleum. The way they moved wasn't random. They weren't wandering. They were searching, slowly fanning out, scanning in every direction with dead eyes that didn't blink. The moment one of them twitched toward the darkened shop corridor we were hiding in, I felt Jorge grip my arm tight enough to bruise. I pulled him back, motioned for silence. He was shaking, but he understood. We backed up through the maintenance corridor until the footfalls behind us were drowned by a louder sound. Something unexpected, muffled at first, then sharper and unmistakable. Gunfire. At first, it was just a few shots. Distant, maybe down toward the baggage level or loading dock. Then another burst closer. Sharp cracks of suppressed rifles echoed through the terminal structure, followed by a short pause and the unmistakable noise of boots moving in formation. I peeked through the slats of the metal security grate. In the main hallway near the tram doors, a group of figures in dark gear swept into view. Tactical vests, helmets, suppressed M4's shoulder-mounted lights. Not airport security, not DHS, not police. These were military or private, moving with tight discipline, checking corners, covering each other's arcs. They didn't pause for announcements, didn't issue warnings. When they saw the group of infected walking toward them, they opened fire in bursts. Headshots mostly. No hesitation. The first one dropped like a rock. The next took a round clean through the temple. 2 more staggered backward and collapsed after hits to the spine and neck. The last one tried to lunge, but was caught mid-motion and flung backward by the kinetic force of 3 rounds tearing through his chest and shoulder. What caught me off guard wasn't the violence. It was how calm they were. This wasn't their first encounter. They didn't react like men seeing monsters for the first time. They were clearing the perimeter like they'd done this before. One of them stepped over a twitching corpse and radioed in, his voice low, clipped, professional. Sector DC junction cleared. 7 down, minimal resistance, moving north toward Terminal B. I looked at Jorge, who was still frozen in place. His mouth was slightly open, eyes fixed on the hallway like he couldn't process it. I grabbed his shoulder, tried to pull him back into motion, but he didn't move until the fire team turned the corner and vanished from sight. That finally broke the spell. He whispered, "What the hell are they? Who are they even shooting?" I didn't answer. I didn't have one. We waited another minute to be sure they were gone, then moved quickly through the corridor behind the gift shop, sticking close to the wall, flashlight off. The terminal lighting had dimmed even further, leaving emergency track lights flickering along the ceiling. We passed through the employee checkpoint and into a storage hallway lined with vending machines and service lockers. That's where we found another body. It was a woman in a TSA uniform, maybe late 50s. She'd been torn open from the abdomen, not just bitten, ripped. Her belt radio was still on, softly buzzing with static. One arm had been broken at the joint, hanging loose at her side. I crouched next to her, trying to find a pulse or sign of life. Even though I already knew better, her skin was cold, her eyes were open. She wasn't breathing. We moved on. The hallway split ahead. One route went toward the employee shuttle lot, the other back into Terminal C. The shuttle lot was the smarter bet. It opened into the open air, and if the perimeter wasn't sealed yet, we could reach the security gate and flag down help. But we never made it that far. A sudden voice called out from ahead. Male, urgent. "Don't move!" A beam of white light hit us in the face, and I instinctively raised my hands. Jorge did the same. The light flicked upward as the man approached. He wasn't military. He looked like one of the airport operations staff. Late 20s, wearing a windbreaker and cargo pants, a radio clipped to his shoulder. "You're alive," he said, almost surprised. "We need to get inside now. Follow me. This whole section's about to be cleared." "Cleared?" I asked, following behind. "By who?" He didn't answer. He led us down the hallway toward an old service door with a keypad. He entered a code and pulled it open, revealing a narrow stairwell that descended into one of the older mechanical spaces. "You don't want to be up here when they sweep through. They're not making distinctions anymore. If you're upright and not badged, you're a liability." We followed him down, into the concrete-walled underbelly of the terminal. The place reeked of dust, oil, and old mop water. Water dripped from pipes overhead, and somewhere far off, a sump pump rattled to life. At the bottom, a door opened into what looked like a long-forgotten command room, walls lined with circuit panels, old CRT monitors, and a few folding chairs. A large metal cabinet had been dragged in front of the main entrance. Inside were 3 others, a young woman in a food service apron, a man in cargo ramp overalls, and an older guy in janitorial blues with blood-stained sleeves. No one spoke for a while. The air was still, thick with tension. I finally asked the ops worker, "What do you mean they're clearing the terminal?" He glanced at the others, then sat down slowly. "I've been monitoring emergency traffic on the secondary channel. Whoever those guys are, they're not from the state. Not the feds either. Not officially. I heard them call themselves Recovery Asset Group 2, like they're part of a larger deployment. They landed at Opaloka around 2100 and have been hitting hot sites ever since. MIA was flagged as compromised less than an hour ago." "So they're here to help?" Jorge asked. The man shook his head. "They're not rescuing anyone. They're wiping the slate. They don't want this thing getting out. If they find you, they put 2 in the chest and 1 in the head and move on. If you're bleeding or confused, they don't ask questions. I watched them shoot a guy who was limping and trying to explain he got hurt running. They didn't care. They just dropped him. I leaned back against the wall, trying to absorb that. My head throbbed, not from pain, but from the overwhelming wave of information. In a few hours, the entire airport had shifted from routine chaos to full lockdown, and now it was being sterilized by a kill team. Jorge slumped into a chair and stared at the floor, lips moving slightly like he was praying, or maybe just trying to process it. The janitor finally spoke. I saw them too, couple of hours ago. I was near baggage when they came in. Real quiet, real fast. Took out a whole pack of those things. No hesitation. Then I watched them shoot a mother holding a baby. Just dropped her. No warning. He didn't say what happened to the baby. We stayed in that control room for a while. Maybe an hour. Hard to tell. No clocks, no working phones. Just the low hum of backup power and the occasional thud from above as something, or someone, moved through the upper hallways. The ops guy passed around bottles of water from an emergency crate, and I forced myself to drink even though my stomach felt like a twisted knot. Every sound felt amplified. Every minute stretched longer than it should have. Eventually, the lights flickered again. A low vibration passed through the floor. I heard a faint series of muffled pops above. Controlled charges, maybe. Someone was clearing sections of the terminal with demolitions. The ops guy stood. That's our cue. They're moving west to east. We need to get to the ground transport tunnels now. There's an old evacuation corridor that connects to the car rental building. If we make it there, we can break into the parking level and maybe get out. But we've got to move. I wasn't sure it was the right move. None of us were. But staying put wasn't an option anymore. Not with the gunfire getting closer and the sweep team moving in sectors. Jorge stood up, knuckles white on his crowbar. The janitor grabbed a mop handle sharpened at the end, and the woman, her name was Nadine, we learned later, held a steel tray like a shield. The corridor we moved into was darker than before. Emergency lights blinked overhead, not in a steady rhythm but irregularly, casting everything in alternating bursts of orange and shadow. The air smelled like warm plastic and hydraulic fluid. Somewhere above us, the terminal was still alive. Barely. We could hear movement, distant shouting, and something heavier. Not the stomping of infected feet, but the coordinated thuds of boots in formation. The sweep teams were still clearing sector by sector, but they were closing in fast. The ops guy, who finally introduced himself as Leo, led us down a maintenance ramp used to ferry oversized cargo beneath the tarmac. The floor sloped slightly and was littered with spilled tools, broken zip ties, and a few open duffel bags left behind in a hurry. A broken maintenance cart was wedged into one wall, and someone had written a message on its side in grease pencil. Stay quiet, they hear movement. Whether it was meant for us or someone before us, I couldn't say. We passed a large steel access gate that looked like it had been forced open from the other side. The bolts had bent inward. Not cut, bent. Something with more strength than coordination had come through here. No blood, no bodies. Just the echo of our footsteps and that feeling we were walking across ground, already claimed by something else. Jorge kept glancing behind him, his crowbar clenched like he was expecting to use it every 10 steps. I couldn't blame him. I had the same urge, my palms slick from holding the flashlight too tight. After about 10 minutes of slow, careful descent, the hallway widened. We were under the south terminal now. The sound of the plane train was gone, replaced by deeper mechanical hums. Maybe HVAC backups or pressurization fans buried somewhere behind the walls. That's when we heard it. The whine of turbines above us, louder than anything in the building so far. It wasn't a plane. It was lower, sharper, and vibrating through the concrete. Helicopters. Leo stopped and raised a hand. Military, he said quietly. 2, maybe 3. Sounds like inbound landings. That's not from Opaloka. That's close, within half a mile tops. We ducked into a side junction that opened into a long, curved concrete access tunnel. At the far end, a steel ladder led up to a locked maintenance hatch. Leo scrambled up and popped the latch after entering a code into a keypad mounted to the side. It clicked open, and a cold rush of night air blasted down into the tunnel. We emerged into a recessed loading dock behind a row of terminal maintenance buildings, just east of the runway lighting towers. The rain had stopped. The wind hadn't. And above us, on the central tarmac, 3 Black Hawk helicopters were touching down in formation. Their rotors kicked up debris and dust, and their side doors opened almost before they hit the ground. Troops in full military gear poured out, moving fast, rifles raised, eyes scanning every direction. These weren't the same units as the sweep teams. These men wore full-color US Army patches, 101st Airborne, I think, and carried standard-issue M4 carbines, sidearms, and packs of unknown gear strapped to their thighs and vests. A voice called out from a bullhorn near the main concourse entry ramp. "Civilians near perimeter, hands visible, do not move." A spotlight hit us from the control tower annex, and we froze. A second team moved in from our left, 6 soldiers, one with a camera, the others covering in a semicircle formation. "Step forward, one at a time. Keep your hands up. No sudden movements," another soldier barked, this time without amplification. We obeyed. Jorge was first, then Nadine, then the janitor, and finally me. Leo hesitated, clearly debating whether to run, but a second spotlight pinned him in place before he could decide. They took us in hard, no time for questions. Plastic flex cuffs went on, and they separated us into groups. 2 soldiers escorted me and Jorge toward a row of security vehicles idling near the runway edge. The rest were taken the opposite way, toward the emergency access ramp leading to the long-term parking garage. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't gentle either, the kind of operation where every second counted, and the people in charge had stopped assuming anyone could be trusted. As they dragged us across the slick asphalt, I caught a glimpse of the terminal in full view for the first time. Glass shattered across the length of Concourse E. Smoke or steam, maybe both, was rising from the east end, near the customs annex. A fuel truck had been jackknifed into the gate platform. One of the sweep team's unmarked vehicles was still running, lights spinning in a lazy pattern across a puddle streaked with red. They moved us to an impromptu staging area on the far edge of the property. It was a large lot used mostly for overflow car rentals, now stripped clean of vehicles and converted into a makeshift quarantine zone. Dozens of people were already inside, some in airport uniforms, others in plain clothes. They had tents set up, plastic folding chairs, large floodlights powered by a portable generator, and a perimeter made of metal barricades linked with military mesh netting. A soldier cut my cuffs with a multi-tool and motioned toward the main lot. "You're not under arrest," he said flatly. "You're under containment until medical evaluation is complete. Keep your ID on you. Do not leave the perimeter. Stay in sight of the towers." Cell phone service was gone completely. Everyone was checking their phones, holding them high in the air, walking in circles, waving them like magic wands. Nothing worked. No signal, no bars, no Wi-Fi. One woman had a satellite phone and couldn't connect either. I tried mine again. Nothing but a black screen after a few seconds of searching. Jorge looked around, his expression hollow. "They're jamming us," he muttered. "They don't want this getting out." They didn't say it, but it was obvious. There were mobile towers on wheels set up near the edge of the perimeter, but they weren't broadcasting, only receiving, probably limited to military channels. Whatever was going on in Miami International wasn't just about containment, it was about silence. Inside the quarantine zone, the atmosphere was part triage, part lockdown. A medical tent processed people one by one. Blood pressure checks, temperature, reflexes, quick flashlights to the eyes, even oral swabs. Everyone was logged. Everyone was tagged with a plastic band. Mine was red, Jorge's was blue. I didn't know what the colors meant, but I saw more red than blue. People started asking questions. Loud ones. Why were we being held? Where were the buses? Who was in charge? A man in a business suit tried to push through the mesh and was immediately thrown back by 2 guards who didn't even raise their weapons. They just slammed him to the ground and zip-tied him again. He didn't resist after that. I kept my head down and observed. In the far tent, I saw a team of hazmat-suited personnel entering data into a satellite uplink station. There was a map projected on the wall, color-coded zones spreading from MIA to points north. Hialeah was marked in yellow, downtown Miami in orange. The airport was red. Beyond that, nothing. No green zones. just blank space. I sat with Jorge under one of the floodlights, both of us clutching bottled water handed out by a volunteer in army surplus. He hadn't said a word in half an hour. I didn't press him. What could we even talk about? We'd both seen people we knew torn apart. We'd both run from something neither of us had words for. And now we were in a fenced lot under military control with helicopters still circling the sky. At around 3 a.m., a soldier came around calling names from a list. When I heard mine, I stood without thinking. He motioned me toward the second line of tents. Red band evac. Prep for movement. You're being relocated for secondary observation. Jorge grabbed my arm. Where are they taking you? I looked at him, unsure. I'll find out. He let go. I followed the soldier to a side gate, where 3 trucks were idling, unmarked, heavy-duty cargo haulers with canvas tops. No logos, no lights inside. One of them already had people seated along the interior walls. I was told to climb in, handed a mask, and ordered to keep it on. I did. The inside of the truck smelled like rubber and sweat. I stepped over someone's boots as I found a spot along the wall. Canvas stretched tightly above us. No windows, no vents, just the distant growl of the engine as we rolled out. There were maybe 12 of us packed in, men and women from the airport, a TSA agent, 2 pilots still in uniform, and a guy in a catering apron covered in dried red streaks I hoped wasn't his own blood. Everyone wore the same hollow look, the kind you get after you've seen too much but are still expected to move like everything's fine. The truck swayed over uneven ground, and the fluorescent floodlights from the airport perimeter disappeared behind us. Nobody said anything for the first 10 minutes. I think most of us were trying to convince ourselves that this was still some kind of emergency procedure, that the government had a plan, that the chaos back at the terminal would eventually be explained, cleaned up, and maybe even disappear into headlines. But then, someone near the front of the truck broke the silence. "You think they're taking us to a hospital?" A woman across from him shook her head slowly. "Hospitals are full. I've got a cousin at Baptist. He said they shut the doors 2 hours ago, turned off the lights, locked the gates. No ambulances in or out." The guy in the apron leaned forward. "They shot a man next to the tram platform. He wasn't even bitten. He was just asking for help." That shut everyone up again. The truck slowed, took a hard left turn, and rolled over gravel. I peeked under the flap near the rear door and caught glimpses of floodlights, chain-link fencing, and uniformed figures holding rifles near metal barricades. The area looked like a repurposed distribution center, probably something owned by the city or leased for emergencies. We passed a checkpoint, then another. Finally, the brakes hissed, and the truck came to a full stop. The rear doors opened and floodlights poured in, blinding us. "Everyone out! Masks on, hands visible!" a voice shouted. We filed out slowly, blinking against the glare, stepping down into a yard surrounded by razor wire fencing. There were several large tents, trailers with portable toilets, and tall lighting towers powered by diesel generators. The air was thick with the smell of burned fuel and bleach. A military truck sat near the gate, its turret unmanned but clearly ready. Farther off, I saw what looked like a mobile decontamination unit with plastic sheeting and a series of hoses feeding into an industrial tank. They split us again. One line for those marked with red bands, another for blue. I stayed with the reds. A medic in camo fatigue scanned my ID badge, took my temperature, and marked something on a clipboard. Another handed me a sealed bottle of water, a protein bar, and a rolled-up blanket. No explanations, no questions, just instructions. "You'll be held here until cleared. Do not attempt to leave. Do not approach the fencing. Medical checks every 4 hours. Stay inside your assigned zone." The red band area was the smaller of the two. Only a few dozen people, spread out in folding chairs or huddled near portable heaters. A large white tent stood at the far end, with guards posted at its entrance. I watched as 2 men in hazmat suits escorted someone inside. He didn't resist, but he didn't look like he was all there either. Just walking forward, eyes glassy, hands slack at his sides. I found an empty seat near a stack of unused pallets and sat down, blanket still folded in my lap. The noise of the generators hummed constantly, joined by the occasional bark of a radio or the clatter of boots on gravel. Overhead, the helicopters hadn't stopped. One circled every few minutes. Not Black Hawks this time. Smaller birds, probably surveillance units or transport for VIPs. One of the guards near the fence muttered something about Jacksonville being on fire, but no one pressed him for details. Time moved differently in that place. There were no clocks, no announcements, just the floodlights and the endless droning of equipment. At one point, a nurse passed by with a cart of thermometers and flashlights. When she got to me, she looked tired. Her gloves were stained, and the bottom half of her mask was damp with condensation. "How long have you been here?" I asked, surprised by how dry my own voice sounded. She looked at me for a moment like she wasn't sure if I was real. "Since before the first sweep team hit Terminal A," she said quietly. "They didn't expect it to spread. They thought they had it walled in. They were wrong." She moved on. Around 4:20 a.m., another truck arrived. This one smaller, more heavily armored. It pulled up near the far gate, and a cluster of soldiers formed around it. A man stepped out in a long coat, wearing a gas mask and carrying a tablet in one hand. He didn't speak to anyone, just pointed toward the red band tent. 2 more people were taken inside. This time, they weren't walking. They were dragged, barely conscious. One had bite marks on his arm. The other had already started twitching. One of the guards watching them turned his head away like he couldn't watch again. Whatever was happening in that tent, it wasn't treatment. By sunrise, the temperature had dropped. Miami mornings are usually humid and warm, but that morning had an eerie stillness. The sky turned grey, not the soft pastel pink of a regular Florida dawn, but a thick, colourless ceiling of cloud. No birds, no flights overhead, no morning traffic from the expressway, just the slow churn of machinery and the occasional cough from someone sitting too close to the perimeter netting. I saw Jorge again just after 6 a.m. He was on the other side of the chain-link fence in the blue band zone. We spotted each other at the same time and walked toward the barrier. Neither of us smiled. "You okay?" he asked. "For now," I said. "They haven't done anything yet, just moved us around. What about you?" He leaned against the mesh, voice low. "They took 3 people out of here earlier, said it was for advanced screening. We haven't seen them since." A soldier approached and tapped the wire with his baton. "No contact through the fence. Back to your zones." We stepped away. Jorge gave me one last look before turning around and disappearing into the sea of cots and folding chairs. That was the last time I saw him for a while. Around mid-morning, a man in a grey uniform, some kind of federal liaison, stood on a makeshift platform and addressed the red band group through a bullhorn. His voice was flat, rehearsed. He explained that Miami International had been designated a federal containment zone following the detection of a high-risk pathogen. He said our presence here was for our own safety. He said every effort was being made to protect citizens and restore order. He didn't mention the dead who got back up. He didn't mention the things roaming the lower corridors. He didn't mention that the radio signals were being jammed or that the city itself was likely falling apart outside the fence. After he stepped down, the guards reinforced the fencing and added a second row of barricades. Someone started crying near the water station. Another person threw up in the grass. The man who spoke never returned. Sometime just before noon, the alarm sounded. A shrill digital shriek that cut through the camp like a blade. Guards snapped to attention. Gates slammed shut. Orders were shouted into radios. I stood and saw through a gap in the fence a figure staggering toward the checkpoint at the north end of the compound. It was a civilian, torn shirt, bloody chin, moving erratically. The guard at the nearest watchpoint lifted his weapon and shouted a command. The figure didn't respond. Another shout. Still no reaction. Then, a shot. 1 round, center mass. The civilian dropped to a knee, then stood back up. 3 more rounds followed. This time, the figure collapsed completely, motionless. But no one approached the body. They left it there, just outside the fence. A warning, a reminder, or maybe just policy. The rest of the day passed without further incident, but the tension never faded. I kept my head low, answered questions when asked, and waited for the next instructions. Whatever was happening outside the camp, we weren't going to hear about it from the people running things. News didn't come in. No phones, no screens, no announcements. Just the weather, the noise of machines, and the constant waiting. The waiting turned into routine, and routine made everything worse. The more we sat under those floodlights, wrapped in donated blankets and breathing the same recycled air, the more we understood that nothing was coming. No briefings, no explanations, no transportation out. The federal team hadn't spoken since the morning's announcement. The medics who checked us had started rotating more frequently, sometimes not returning at all. A few of the red band group noticed one of the hazmat teams loading sealed bins into a black SUV. Each bin was labeled only with a 4-digit code and a yellow tag. Nobody asked questions aloud, but we all saw the same thing. Those bins weren't for storing medicine. Late that night, we were moved again. This time it was just the red band group. They lined us up near the west gate under armed escort and told us we'd be taken to a long-term observation center outside the city. They called it Camp Orion. One by one, we were herded onto another set of cargo haulers. I climbed into the third truck. Inside, it was just as dark and quiet as the first ride. Except this time, I knew better than to expect anything close to safety. As the truck pulled out, I caught one last look at the camp through the canvas flap. Jorge was standing near the blue band medical tent, staring toward us with a look I couldn't read. Maybe he thought we were lucky to be leaving. Maybe he knew better. The convoy rolled out slowly, escorted by 2 Humvees. We traveled west along unfamiliar backroads. From the way the truck leaned during turns and the sound of gravel beneath the tires, I figured we weren't taking any major highways. Whatever Camp Orion was, it wasn't on any public map. The night was pitch black, no city lights, no traffic, just the rhythmic hum of engines and the occasional squawk of radios through the front cabin. I lost track of time. My phone was still dead, still searching for signal like a heartbeat that never returned. The people around me had gone quiet again, some of them dozing upright, others staring at the floor with unfocused eyes. No one spoke until the brakes jolted us forward and the engine dropped into idle. We waited another full minute before the rear doors opened. A soldier with a flashlight waved us out. What we saw wasn't a medical facility. It wasn't even a real structure. Camp Orion was a fenced clearing in the middle of what looked like an abandoned industrial park, maybe a warehouse site that had never finished construction. Barbed wire coiled along the tops of concrete slabs. There were 4 tents, 1 prefab shelter, and 2 mobile command trailers with satellite dishes mounted on top. A row of oil drums burned along the edge of the perimeter, and beyond all of it, silence. Inside the camp, they took everything. Blankets, water bottles, even the protein bars we'd been given earlier. They scanned our wristbands again and assigned us to bunk units, 12 per tent. No one resisted. Most of us were too tired to argue. The canvas smelled like mildew and old plastic. Cots had thin foam pads and no sheets. I picked one near the flap and lay down without taking off my boots. That was the first night I heard the screaming. It came from the east end of the camp, near one of the command trailers. A high, sharp scream that cut off halfway through. Then nothing for a few minutes. Then another, lower, raspier. People stirred in their bunks but didn't get up. We all knew the rules. You stayed where you were. You didn't ask questions. You didn't walk toward noise. The next morning, a body was gone from our tent. A man named Ruiz, airport baggage crew. He'd sat across from me the whole day before, whispering about his girlfriend in Brickell and whether the bridges were still open. Now his cot was stripped bare, and his wristband lay on the floor. Not broken, removed. I asked a guard where he'd gone. The guard said, medical evac. He developed symptoms. I didn't ask what symptoms. The guard's eyes didn't blink when he said it. By the 3rd day, we weren't being examined anymore. The medical tents were locked. Food was dropped off in crates. Half the guards had changed. The ones that replaced them wore darker gear. No names, no ranks. One of them had a patch that said only T1Z21. Another had no patch at all. The trailers were sealed tight, and we never saw anyone go in or out. Some of the inmates started whispering rumors about a boat in the Everglades, about a border checkpoint in Naples still open, about people who'd made it out. No one knew if any of it was true, but every rumor ended the same way. If you waited too long, you were done. I kept thinking about Flight 417. about how none of this made sense until that plane landed. The infection, if that's what it was, didn't start in Miami. It arrived here, carried inside pressurized cabins, across borders, through customs, past every barrier we thought we had. Those passengers weren't victims, they were the start. And whatever agency had tracked it, whoever was giving orders now, they weren't trying to protect us. They were trying to erase the beginning. The breach happened on the fourth night. It started with one of the mobile generators cutting out. The floodlights on the north fence flickered and went dark. Guards moved fast, shouting orders, repositioning patrols. We were told to stay inside our tents, to lock the flaps from the inside. I did. Everyone did. But the silence after the blackout wasn't natural. It wasn't just equipment failure. Something had changed. Then came the gunfire, sustained bursts from the east gate, close, within 50 yards. Screams followed, both human and not. I couldn't describe the second sound. It was wrong. Deep, wet, something scraping under the surface of a throat. Not animal, not human. Something else. 2 minutes later, something hit our tent wall from the outside. The fabric bulged inward as if struck by a heavy weight, then a sharp tearing sound, and people started shouting. A hand, grey, swollen, fingers twisted, tore through the seam. I didn't wait. I kicked the back of the tent out and crawled into the dark, slamming into the gravel and rolling to my feet. People were running in every direction, some screaming, some silent. One man staggered past with his face covered in blood, his left eye missing, still moving like he didn't know he was dead. A guard fired from the top of a cargo crate, sweeping his rifle across the yard. Something climbed the side and dragged him down. I sprinted toward the edge of the camp, where a stack of supply pallets had been piled beside a portable fuel tank. A small gap had formed behind it, just enough to slip through. I ducked under the fencing, ignoring the tear it left in my arm, and ran into the night. The air outside the camp was cold and quiet. I kept running, overgrown pavement underfoot, chain-link fences flashing past in the dark. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just ran until the lights were behind me, until the sounds of screaming and rifle fire faded into nothing, until there was only the sound of my own boots pounding broken asphalt and the rasp of wind through cracked walls. Eventually, I reached an abandoned loading dock off an old road near Medley. I pried the side door open with a length of steel pipe and locked it behind me. Inside were rusted forklift crates, dust-covered pallets, and silence. I collapsed against the wall and sat there until morning. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just waited. I don't know what happened to Jorge, or Leo, or Nadine. I don't know if they ever made it out. I don't know how far the outbreak reached. The radio stations are dead. The air is still. Miami is silent. I've been surviving on vending machine food and bottled water from a break room I forced open. I found a weather radio, but the emergency channel plays only a looped message now. No contact, no updates. Just an automated voice saying, "If you are hearing this, remain indoors. Avoid contact with infected individuals. Do not attempt to leave your designated shelter zone. Assistance will arrive." It's been saying that for 3 days, and no one has come. I'm still here, somewhere in the ruins of the airport's industrial outskirts. I don't know what's left of the city, but I know what I saw. I know how it started. And if anyone finds this, if anyone's listening, I need you to understand something. It didn't start with chaos. It started quietly, with a flight that shouldn't have landed, a protocol that wasn't followed, and a sickness that didn't act like anything we'd seen before. The outbreak didn't spread because we weren't prepared. It spread because those in charge decided we didn't need to know. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.